with us, Ian,
Hello.
for your paper unexpectedly earlier, and as I say, we'll adjust the time thereafter to deal with that little issue. Really excited to hear your paper on constructivism and problem-based learning, Ian. And I can see from your abstract that it draws very much on the same themes as we've seen within this session, which is about the facilitation of learning, which instantly got me thinking about this concept of how we view ourselves as teachers and how students identify with kind of the learning world as such. So over to you. Thank you very much for your time, Ian.
Thank you, Emma. So this is what we try to teach our students. Things can go wrong, so we have to prepare for the unexpected. So hi, everyone. My name is Ian. Good morning. The topic I'll be talking about is constructivism and problem-based learning. So by way of background, I'm actually relatively new to this. I'm really interested in teaching and learning research, and I do try new things, and then I learn from them, and I make changes in subsequent class. So I will talk about constructivism. That's the first area I looked at in the previous 2 years. Then I tried PBL, and then I did a workshop. So because of time, because Michael already explained about scaffolding, I will only go through this part really quickly. Forgive me if I'm a bit fast on the first part, but just because of time, so I can get to the second part. So as mentioned by Michael before, constructivism is about scaffolding, getting our students to basically activate their prior knowledge in order to build new knowledge. So from my view, the indicator of success would be that our students, they can assume more responsibility for their own learning. So we want the students to be keen and make more effort on their own learning. But as teachers, even for student-centered learning, we actually do more, but more in the design and in the background. So we have scaffolding techniques to give them guidance, and hopefully they can build upon their knowledge. And for myself, I hope to see an increase in self-regulation. So some of you may know from the Dunedin study, one of the key indicator of success is self-control. And in this context, the self-regulation is the students being able to motivate themselves to overcome difficult situations. So even if the topic is boring, if because of study or work they need to learn it, then they need to do it properly. And if they do, often they become more successful afterwards. But in designing the challenge, I need to be careful. If I make it too challenging, I may cause unnecessary anxiety for my students. But if I make it too easy, of course, they'll find it too boring, may not participate as well. So I really like this picture because for me, this is what I believe constructivism is I want my students to take a leap from their comfort zone to the unknown, to build on their prior knowledge, learn something new, and then have the confidence to present the answer, even though they're not sure if it's correct or not, which hopefully they can develop that skill set. So 2 years ago, I started applying the RAC method, very simple, but when my student is required to do it, it became challenging. But fortunately, the overall feedback was positive. They're glad. They seem to find improvements in the writing. So I was happy I did that. And also, it's not just implementing, give them everything to do, and that's it. It's a fine-tuning process. I give them more support in the beginning. I gradually fade away and give them less and less support. And of course, hopefully, they feel more responsible for their own learning. So the results, most important is just I see a good steady trend and improvement in the results. So I was glad about that. So I will not spend too much time on that. But additional bonus I find is when I implemented that approach in the second semester 2 years ago, they actually became more conscious of their study, asked more questions during class, less question by email, and the quality of the question was higher. So I was glad about that. So for me, what's next? Well, I basically encountered problem-based learning. And from one of this article, it told me that the learners in these type of situations, they're presented with a problem to activate their prior knowledge, which they built upon as the learners collaborate in order to construct a theory, a possible answer. So this all sounds like scaffolding. Then they continue to study to try to find or find the answer or refine the theory. That is the self-study part, very important to develop the independent studies. And of course, a hypothesis or a concept, situational interest. Is if your problem is interesting enough, more importantly, is it activates something in them. Let them be aware there's a knowledge gap between their prior knowledge and what they need to learn to answer that problem. normally that becomes a motivational force, drives them to engage with literature, do more self-study to find an answer. So I thought that fits quite well. So I did a pilot PBL workshop for my business law class for term 1. Hopefully it will be a meaningful exercise. I want it to closely resemble what happens in real life. They need to make an effort, but hopefully they'll find they'll benefit from it. So the first client meeting, I believe, is very important. So many of them, if they decide to be a professional at work, this is a frequently used skill set, but it's not really taught at school. Based on my understanding, it's not taught at work. People thought that once you start working, they'll teach you everything you need to know. It's actually not true. So most people, if they're lucky, they attend a meeting with a supervisor, they will observe, but most basically have to learn by themselves. So I wanted to give them to try it during the course, because in the safety at school, if they make a mistake, they'll learn from it, but they don't have to make a mistake in real life. So I try to make it more authentic. My colleagues who have done client simulation told me that the teacher playing the role of client is not as good because they know you already. I try to make it more spontaneous, and I wanted a genuine meeting topic to make it more interesting. So hopefully the student, if they find it a worthwhile challenge, they'll be motivated to put in the effort, and hopefully they'll find it beneficial afterwards. So they will be drawing from their prior knowledge, because during the business law course, I'm sure Michael will teach it in his course as well, is contract of service versus contract for service. So that topic still argued in courts today. So it's a real problem. But of course, I won't make it that easy for them. They will need to make a leap. So what was the leap? The question is basically on a tax case. They need to advise the client on tax matters. So based on my understanding, none of the students have any knowledge of taxation. However, they understand the concept of contract of service, contract for service. And I have explained to them that if the tax authority win and they're found to have contract of service, they pay more tax. So that's a real situation. They were given time to discuss in groups during class, but then after discussion, I tell them, no need to submit the work to me. This is not assessed. If you want to, on a voluntary basis, you can do more research, submit your answer to me, and you can join the workshop. So that's when I told them this is something of voluntary. And I was surprised. I had 7 groups, 6 groups submitted the answers to me and wanted to participate even though there was no assessment. So I was quite surprised at that. And I didn't want to give them any rehearsals, because a lot of them were very keen to participate, but they all want the answers to the submission. They all want a formal training on how to conduct a meeting. But I told them at work, this is exactly what happens. You will never be fully prepared, but you must have the ability to face these unknown and deal with them properly. So then choosing the client, should it be a lay person or a professional? So if it's a lay person, you can learn to use plain language to explain legal terms to them. But I ended up choosing professional because they have extensive client meeting experience, and from the experience, they can role play different type of clients for our students. I also didn't provide any formal training to them. Some of my colleagues, they did client simulation. They want training to ensure consistency. But because I didn't want scripting, so that's why no formal training was provided, but I gave them briefing and also detailed guidance notes. So the format is quite simple. The tables and chairs are at the front of the classroom. The clients would meet each group one at a time. The initial plan was those who were about to meet the client will wait in another room, and then the audience can watch, and that was the initial plan. And at the end, the client will give the overall feedback, answer question, and experience sharing. Unfortunately, just like this morning, things do not go as planned. So it ended up we only had one room, everyone sat in the same location. So we made some change. The professionals, they answered question and behaved differently for each group. For one group, nervous and asked a lot of questions. For another, demanding and not willing to take no for an answer. And the third one, well-informed and asked a lot of difficult questions. So the outcome, I was pleasantly surprised. They performed much better than I expected. Clearly, they did some research and made a genuine effort. So due to the change, all this happened during the exam period. So our class in term 1 was suspended. When they came back, they had makeup exam, they have makeup classes and exams, and they still took time to prepare and attend on a voluntary basis. So I was really appreciative of that. And we all learn a lot from just this simple pilot workshop. The importance of good introduction and ice breaking. Some people thought that's just saying hello and how's the weather. But as you may know, a good rapport with a client, even on a first meeting, can work very well for you for the rest of the meeting and also in future. One thing that stood out the most is some of the students start asking the question from the legal test one by one. They may do that in class or in an exam, but of course you don't do that with your client. And even using layman's terms, they have to be careful because some clients can be very educated, very well informed, and you got to be careful not to use too much layman terms, especially when it's not necessary. And then, of course, learn not to offend the client. This is something we learn as well. So some people thought that's common sense. Of course, you don't want to offend the client, but sometimes you may do it without knowing. So if you do the test one by one and say, oh, this test failed, that test failed, sorry, it's a contract of service, you lose, then of course it will offend the client. And at some point in time, the client will ask, so whose side are you on? So if you're representing a client, no matter if their position is strong or weak, you still need to let them know you're on their side so that if they appear to have a weak case, you may ask for more information to see if there's a way you can strengthen the case. And of course, our student found out that you need to be prepared for some classic question. So what are my chances? What should I win? Will I win or not? So since we can't guarantee, you still need to be prepared for these questions. And of course, since this is the first meeting, you'll need to tell your client, so what's next? What do you want next? So for example, what specific information or documents you want from them. So you cannot contact your client 10 times asking for 10 separate documents. So need to be prepared for that. And of course, to advise the client whether to proceed with the case or not, because sometimes a client will say, I don't want any problems with authority, I won't contest. But if they don't, and the tax position is finalized for that year, it may remain the same for subsequent year. Also, there's a reputational risk for proceeding because the tax authorities under our ordinance are allowed to contact other people about your affairs on your tax matters. And also the name of your company will appear on the court judgment. And of course, how to handle questions that you do not know. So the classic answer to our students is say you will check later, never pretend you know. But imagine if your client asks you 5 questions and you didn't know the answer. If you give them that answer 5 times in a row, they'll lose confidence in you very quickly. So need to prepare to how to manage that. And of course, some clients like to ask for a reduction in fees. Okay, so that's just a simple question. They do not mind if you say no, but just to prepare for that. So sorry for doing this quickly, but I just want to make sure I do it within time. I want to thank the professional who volunteered their time to help the student. And I want to thank the student who made the effort to prepare and participate. And now I hope I will get some comments and advice from you on what improvements I can make when I run these PBL workshop next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. That was really interesting. We do have a question coming in from Michael, our first speaker. I wonder, Michael, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Ian the question.
Yeah, I can do, yeah.
Hi,
can
Michael.
You hear me okay there? Hi, Ian. I thought that was really interesting. I think that was a good fit as well. I like the way that you've been using the same kind of scaffolding and things as well. I wanted to ask about the resources because I've used PBL before, but I've always used it on a kind of paper-based exercise, simply for cost and for scale of how many students. And that also allowed me to kind of put a bit of variation in so that different groups got different paperwork and that they soon figured out that, oh, I've got something similar but different. How intensive was the resource kind of cost for this? And is there any issues, do you think, with this on a scaling kind of size moving forward?
Okay, so thank you for that. Since I'm new at this and I'm still trying, all these resources are just from myself, my own time, and also, fortunately, I have a good network, so I was able to get people to volunteer their time to help out with the students. But you rightly asked about scaling, because I think it will only be helpful if this turns out to be effective and we can scale it for other classes and other courses, then I think it will be more helpful. I guess then I would probably submit a proposal to the school for some teaching grants and in order to get the required resource. I think probably, as you can imagine, the key resource we need is the people to role play the clients. Now, to get
exactly, yeah.
because most of our classes are during daytime, the professionals are working and earning money during that time. So it's not easy to ask them to volunteer their time to come. Even if you pay them, it would not make much difference for most of them. But fortunately, what I've found is most professionals, especially alumni, they are more than happy to do something to help out with the student learning. So I think that scaling is in the back of my mind, but I think the most difficult is to get enough people if we want to do this for more class and more students.
Do you think you might be able to pull on students from a higher level? I'm just thinking that for some of our skills teaching, it comes in at more a postgraduate level, and pulling in some of those students to do it as a taster on the kind of early years undergraduate level, sometimes that can work. But they tend to be more that sort of untrained non-professionals that you were saying didn't work as well because they need more scaffolding and structuring themselves as well.
Yes, I entirely agree with you because I think if you have postgraduate students, some are working or have worked before, they may see the value of this client meeting, then maybe the scaffolding may not be as much required for them. If you have, let's say, first year undergraduate student, may be more difficult to convince them of the importance. But I think any chance we get that can allow them to try this out at school rather than at the workplace, especially the first time, hopefully they will find that helpful.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you for your question, Michael. I'll ask another question, but not since we have the time in, if that's all right.
Sure.
It'd be fascinating to hear how, I mean, in the UK higher education sector in particular, the employability is a real buzzword in the way that we design our teaching, because there is so much onus on universities to demonstrate how they are preparing individuals for the workplace, but also how we are equipping them with the ability to be able to enter into well-paid graduate work. And so I wondered how you're able to, what's next for this intervention as such? How will you be able to develop it further to ensure that not only clearly what you're achieving is that the students are gaining a great deal of skills in order to prepare them for that graduate market, but how are you able to help the students realise what it is they're gaining?
Yes, thank you, Emma. I'm really glad you asked this question because that is the focus on my mind, because my first research was I interviewed employers and asked them, what is your expectation on graduates? So we often hear they're not happy, it's not what they want, but after a more in-depth question asking, I realized is they're not after technical content, they're not even after skill set. The key differentiation, based on what they tell me, is more the mindset and attitude of graduates. For example, independent ability to solve problems. For example, being able to adapt and overcome problems they have not encountered before. So if you put yourself in a position of a supervisor, who would you rather work in your team? Someone who can try to help you solve the problem, or someone just come to you and expect you to solve the problem for them? So I do many things to hopefully improve their technical competence and skills, but underlying is the mindset and attitude I try to show them. Is it turns out many things they're able to do on their own, and the next time they have a problem and they contact the supervisor, it will not just be telling them the problem. They can also propose a solution. And I can tell you, most supervisors, when they hear that, they become so happy because you're really helping them. So in future, I will hopefully do more of similar activities, but the underlying thing I try to, underlying message is that if you have the right mindset and attitude, normally you'll be very employable. So.
Thank you, Ian. I think that's critical, isn't it? The collaboration with the employment sector, because I think there's a danger that within our little education bubble that we second guess or we predict what is important in the employment market, perhaps making such assumptions on the basis of what we perhaps for my instance colleagues have come in from the profession, and therefore we may build our teaching and learning around what is actually the profession of, say, 2, maybe 5 years ago when they were working in the profession.
Yes.
So continuing that collaboration to current day is so important for us to have a real contemporary understanding of what employability skills are necessary. Really interesting to hear you talk about the mindset, because it's that X factor of professionalism, isn't it? It's something that students really struggle in being able to sell themselves at an interview, because they may have built up all these skills within their scaffolded learning. We've equipped them, you know, we've put those tools in their hands as such, and yet when it comes to an interview, or even in the employment situation themselves, then they may have difficulty in, I guess it's articulating, isn't it? It's articulating the skills that they have. And apologies for sounding a little repetitive and championing reflective learning quite so much, but I pose to you the same question that I did Michael. Is there a possibility here of adding an element of assessment that works around reflective learning, such as to get them to write even a short blog post? You know, that's the world that they're dealing with, is short snippets of writing, maybe 500 words, where they articulate through reflection what skills they have gained through this exercise, so that the learning isn't simply in the actual problem-based learning, the activity, but that they do take a step back then and they think, well, I answered this question in this way, but I could have answered in this way, which would have been better for these reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reflection is important not only for the students but also for us, and that's the reason. That's the reason why after the end of all the simulation, we all sat together and chat with the professional. And in addition to the feedback from them, we also got feedback from the students. And I think that's an informal inflection on which part they thought was beneficial, which part they thought was surprising, they didn't know was like that. Obviously, if we formalize it and ask them to actually try to write it down, it'll be even more beneficial. But there was something I was trying out as well, is whether if I make it not an assessed work, they'll still be motivated. So that's the reason why I didn't have that assessed component. But if we did, I agree with you. I think the reflective essay by them, even if it's just a short one, will be beneficial.
Yeah, and I think there's also an opportunity there for peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer feedback, isn't there? Because that could help strengthen their ability to actively reflect on what they did, because that would be reflection on action, whereas their reflection in action would most certainly be informed by those who are there present in the time. I don't know if you caught Professor Reich's papers yesterday, Ian, which was on problem-based learning and how he'd adapted to the COVID situation. And very interestingly, he had his students create the problem question that they were answering as well. So perhaps that is also a way that this model can be further developed, such that the students themselves form part of the creativity that goes into creating the parameters of the problem, and that you're able to it's kind of you know, they become a part of the building of it, the constructivism of it, I guess.
Yes, I agree, because I think, like you said, formulating a problem itself, there's a lot they can learn from it as well. And I think they will take a lot of pride if they are the one who created this event or this situation for other students to look at. So I agree. And I'm glad you gave me that feedback, so I know that there's some things additional I can do the next time I try.
Yeah, because it's all about, to my mind, it's all about building that learning community. And I think, again, a bit like I spoke to Michael about, it's about scaffolding that learning community, whereby there will be perceived barriers when we are moving online. So lots to think about there. Thank you ever so much for your contribution, Ian. Very much appreciated, especially since you stepped in with some connectivity issues with Professor Zhu. Thank you very much. I'm going to just check now with both Professor Zhu and with admin colleagues whether we're able to reconvene on that second paper, which we so sadly missed halfway through. Whilst those responses are coming in, I'm just going to share a few ideas that Michael got to us. I think the motivation is the skills acquisition rather than motivating by reward of academic credit. So again, scaffold the situation so that students are very aware of that can be gained by taking part. Thank you very much for your question there. Final point before I turn to you. Welcome back, Professor Lee. Michael Lower, thank you. Maybe interviewing students about what they have learned, so that they're having that conversation, that dialogic feedback. Again, a very interesting way in which to develop Ian's model further. Welcome back.